Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Helen Bates, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Minster Church in South, and particularly for the Leaves of Southwell Project. And this talk this afternoon has come under the umbrella of the Leaves of Southwell Project. What I do want to do this afternoon is record this meeting, because there are a lot of people who couldn't join us, and what we will do is we'll be able to put this online. So if you're not happy about having your your face recorded or anything like that, then you can turn it off. Obviously, if you want to ask questions later, we would appreciate cameras on. So if you're not keen on being recorded, you can just perhaps take a back seat on this. So that's the first thing that I want to say. The second thing is we will be sending some evaluation out on this, evaluation survey on email, probably tomorrow. And it would be fantastic if you could just take 5 minutes. It's going to be a really short little survey just to sort of do some evaluation for us. Tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, because we're going to be doing a number of these over the coming months, and it will just help us for the next one to think about how we can promote it and organise it. And also, if there's anything that you would be interested in hearing talks on that are connected to the Minster, then please let us know. So this afternoon, I'm really pleased to say that we've got Dr Sophie Hollinshead with us, and she's going to be talking about winter lore, country traditions, things that we've forgotten about. And it's all part of our Leaves of Southwell project. And at the moment, we're doing a new element of reminiscence and thinking about those traditions, things like dialect, country sayings, things we do at sort of certain festivals in the year. So this talk is almost giving us a springboard into that to make us start thinking about those traditions, what they mean to us, things that we may have had when we were children or did when we were children, but we don't do them anymore. And if you look out for some of the work that we're going to be doing on that rural reminiscence project, we'd be keen to talk to anybody who would like to share their memories of rural memories, things to do with maybe parks, allotments, urban areas as well, anything that's about connecting with nature and what nature means to you. So that's me done with, apart from to welcome you today. And I'm going to pass you over to Sophie now. So hopefully Sophie will now appear before me on the screen. Yes.
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
That's a good thing. Right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for giving in Southwell here. It's a lovely sunny afternoon to come and listen to me in your front rooms or wherever else you're listening. Draw up a chair to the Inglenook fireplace and find out about winter past. And obviously, because of the time of year that we're dealing with here, Christmas is going to play quite a crucial role in this talk this afternoon. And what I'm going to look at is some of the traditions, the sayings, the activities, the foods and the memories of winter and Christmas past, and particularly those that maybe have affected rural communities most. My background, as some of you will know, is it's a bit of a mixed one, really. I started off as an art historian, moved into sort of teaching interdisciplinary humanities, and have evolved into a cultural geographer in my old age. So I'm particularly interested in landscapes. My research has tended to focus on Lincolnshire and the East Midlands, but Lincolnshire primarily, so you will hear a lot about that county this afternoon, although I have tried to include things which are maybe more relevant to those of you that are based in the East Midlands, and some wider traditions as well that everybody will be able to think about. As Helen says, I'm going to try and speak for about an hour. Keeping an eye on the time, I have my lovely assistant Aoife here, who is going to, if I start speaking over, you're going to tell me to stop, Aoife, because that it could happen. And I'm hoping that at the end we'll have about half an hour or so when you will be able to join in the conversation and contribute some of your own memories and experiences. As Helen says, we would like this to become something that people get involved with, and maybe we can take a bit further. So, hurrah, the first slide has changed and appeared. This is an excellent thing. So the months of January and February, December, January and February are really the ones that I'm going to be talking about today. And as I say, they are very much dominated now by the festival of Christmas. There are a few things that I thought I'd mention just before we get to the interesting stuff. You have to have a bit of boring history first, I'm afraid. The way that we look at and celebrate Christmas today, and the way we look at the winter time in general, is influenced by any number of things. But I think there are 4 points in particular that I wanted to stress to you because they maybe have an impact. We were talking about memory, and in many ways the way that we remember things are also to do with the memories of others from the past, and a good few things have changed during that. So this first slide really is just to introduce you to a few things that I think you just need to know about before I start talking about laws and traditions. The first one is the change from the Gregorian to the Julian calendar in 1752. I mention that because, of course, up until then, not only did November have more days to it, but Christmas was celebrated on a different date. So you will hear me mention things like Old New Year's Eve, Old Christmas Day during this talk, because in certain parts of the country, those ideas remained for a long time, and indeed still do in some places, as you will see. The other thing crucial to mention is the Reformation, not because of that old chestnut about Oliver Cromwell wanting to ban Christmas and mince pies, although I think he did, but the fact that very few things really survived the Reformation in terms of winter customs and festivals. So really almost everything that we have today is some sort of revival that's happened.
Aoife, can you unmute?
And then again, the 1960s and 70s. I can't tell you why I've just put 1970s down there. Include the 60s as well, because that was a period when a lot of people really started getting very interested in traditional and rural customs. So, repeat that because apparently we were on mute. Hello. I believe we've been on mute for part of that. So can somebody tell me how far you got with me before I faded from view?
We heard most of it. I think
right, okay. Well, I think
everybody apart from themselves. So Aoife, can I just suggest, as there's a little pause, could you mute everybody and then you'll be able to be heard?
Photobombed by Aoife. Okay. Now you should just be able to hear me, I think, now. So I think the slide anyway makes that pretty clear what we were saying there. And if I just go on to the...
You're going to have to click up there.
Oh, right, okay. Thank you, Aoife.
No worries.
So if we just go on to that next slide, that's the fourth thing I was going to talk about, which is the way that Christmas has been written, the way that the narratives of Christmas have been constructed. And I'm saying Christmas here, but wintertime generally actually could come under this this category. There are 2 authors that I think are the main culprits for this. Charles Dickens, I think a lot of people tend to associate Dickens with having kind of invented a sort of Victorian Christmas that we all think was the traditional Christmas, and in fact really wasn't at all. But I think even worse, if you like, than Dickens is Washington Irving, an American author who spent quite a lot of time in Britain during the 1820s and 30s, who really, in his book Old Christmas, wrote a very fictionalized, factual account of Christmas in an English country house, and a lot of people have taken ideas from that as being what people in the country did at Christmas, and frankly they didn't. So don't believe anything Washington Irving says. We'll come back to him later on, because he is quite an interesting character and he does have a few interesting things to say. So let's just get to the next slide. I'm just getting used to the technology here, so bear with me when I press the wrong buttons. Let's start off with the winter solstice, the shortest day, or St Thomas's Day, whatever you want to call it, because this was a day that maybe for our maybe great-great-grandparents was a day that was associated with certain types of charity and almsgiving. St Thomas's Day, back in my home county of Lincolnshire, was known as Goodening Day, but it's known as various things across the country. You might know it as Goodening Day, Gathering Day, Doling Day, Mumping Day. I think Mumping Day is a particularly nice one. And this was a day when the elderly and very poor women of a village, often widows, would go out legitimately to beg for alms or for food. So this was something that seems to go back to a period where people maybe were reliant on the landlord or the farmer to give them something to make Christmas a little bit merrier if they were working with an agricultural community. Obviously, if women were on their own, if their husbands had died or they'd been widowed, they were left with very little. So this was a means of gaining a little bit of Christmas cheer to help them through the festive season. And you can see on the slide that I've got there's a couple of accounts of what St Thomas's Day, Goodening Day might have been like. The first one is from a Nottinghamshire newspaper from 1894, where the writer talks about seeing groups of bent, withered figures going door to door. I suspect most of these women were probably about my age, so I'm not too sure about these bent and withered figures. But also with a rhyme that goes with it, which is so typical of these kinds of traditions, that there will usually be some sort of little rhyme that reminds us why people are doing these things. Sometimes this gooding or goodening took place on Boxing Day as well. In fact, it seems to gradually have extended from the solstice, the 21st of December, across to really almost any point during the Christmas holiday, and it was a means of being able to give people a little bit of charity. And it appears to have really started to die out in the early 20th century, and I think we can probably put that down to things like the development of poor laws and a kind of Victorian attitude towards begging as well, because a lot of Victorians really did not like the fact that people would come to their doors asking for food and drink or money. And you can see there a lovely account from the Stamford Mercury of 1845, where the good citizens of Stamford were proposing to get up a subscription so that they could prevent the usual mendacity on St Thomas's Day, so that people would be freed from the begging pest. And this seems to be very much how the tradition came to be seen, that it was, you know, a nuisance rather than something sort of old-fashioned and lovely. And so gradually that idea of mumping or gathering, whatever we want to call it, goodening, died out. But there were some other traditions around St Thomas's Day. Almost every Saint's Day in the church calendar has some sort of little weather-related or agriculture-related phrase that goes with it. So if it freezes on St Thomas's Day, the price of corn will fall. If it's mild, the price will rise. Remember that, we're coming up towards that time of year for anybody out there who's growing their corn. Other traditions of St Thomas's Day that, again, I think have probably largely died out. Predictions, again, any sort of significant time of the year. St Thomas's Day, the 21st, is the shortest day of the year. It's the winter solstice. Everything comes to a bit of a standstill. And at such times of year, of course, people in the past have regarded that perhaps the veils between this world and the next are a little bit thinner than they are the rest of the time. And so predictions of who you might marry are something that we associate with St Thomas's Day. You know, young women might go through various rituals of how they might see their future love. I think one very popular one was to try and walk upstairs and go to bed backwards, and then you would dream of your future husband. I never tried that myself. I suspect very few have. The other thing you could do was to place a peeled onion, known as St Thomas's onion, under your pillow, and you might dream of your future love. Again, I'm not sure that's one that anybody really ought to try. There's also a tradition of wearing new clothes. And again, I think because the shortest day is seen as both an end and a beginning, if we go back to pre-Christian times and the Celtic calendar, you know, it's the start of shorter days, of more light, of a new time of rebirth. So new clothes was something that were associated with that time of year, and some of those traditions carried on in quite unusual places actually for well into the 20th century, and some may still go on. There's a school in Stamford where a private school in Stamford where the boys were all given a new suit of clothes, taken to church, and given a glass of milk and a bun on St Thomas's Day as a means of celebrating. The other thing that you might find happening at this time of year is guising or mumming. Now, I'm going to talk quite a lot about that later on, so we'll leave it out of the kind of solstice traditions there, but I will come back to it. And just to explain that mysterious word hogglers there, which is one that you might not be familiar with, hoggling was a practice whereby in rural Lincolnshire, out on the dreary fens where I come from, they would get bands of men together who would go out gathering small sums of money, which were then used to light a candle at the church. And this was very much a thing that agricultural workers did. They would gather money, or maybe even small gifts of food to take home to their families as well. It's quite a mysterious system, hoggling, because we really don't know much about it. It died out very early on, but we know that in some churches, lights, candles were paid for to be lit on St Thomas's Day by these hogglers. So again, a sort of throwback to the idea that this time of year and the shortest day is all about moving towards a time where there might be more light, and bringing light into the home and into the church is something that, again, we very much associate with this time of year generally. As indeed we do, bringing greenery into the house at this time of year. I know for a fact that certain people out there in the audience have put their Christmas trees up. Some of them put more than one Christmas tree up, which is, you know, just going over the top, isn't it? How many Christmas trees does one person need? But this is very much a tradition that goes back to the idea that you would bring in something which would remind you of new life, of renewal. No doubt this went on in pre-Christian times, but of course it's a wonderful symbol for the Christian church as well to take on this idea of renewal, new life, evergreens particularly that live forever, the notion of everlasting life. So one of the things that you might have had before the Christmas tree became popular in the 19th century would be a kissing bough. I had every intention before this talk of actually trying to construct a kissing bough this year, and I was going to take photos of it to show you. It hasn't happened, although I do have quite a cunning plan of how I'm going to achieve this, and I will at some point do this, because a kissing bough is a metal frame. It can be, as you can see in the illustrations here by Joan Hassel, either a sort of what we call a crown shape or a sphere. And you would wrap your greenery around the frame of the kissing bough, so holly, ivy, bay, mistletoe, all the evergreens, not just the ones we maybe think about as Christmassy now, but anything that was evergreen, any evergreen plant. And then you would put your sprig of mistletoe in the middle of that, and it would hang down as the central part of the kissing bough. And you would also hang apples from it, so it would be this kind of construction of greenery with apples hanging down from it. And again, it's all to do with, you know, light and fruitfulness for the year to come. Quite where that originates is difficult to say. We often get told that a lot of these traditions go back to the ancient Celts, which they may well do, but as I said at the beginning, there have been so many changes, political, economic, agricultural, that it's hard to know quite when and how a lot of these traditions have developed. But I think just on a human level, the idea of bringing greenery in at this time of year is just something that as a human being you might do to brighten the house up. There's nothing else out there to pick and bring in to make things look lovely. So greenery certainly is something that we might adopt at this time of year. We certainly know that when the Romans were in Britain, they celebrated a festival called Saturnalia, which you may well have heard of, which was, again, a kind of midwinter festival, which made a great play of bringing holly into the house. Holly was one of the things that we associate with that. Holly, ivy and mistletoe, I think, are the three, maybe the three green stuffs, apart from the Christmas tree, that we most associate with this time of year. Mistletoe, of course, as well, being sacred to the Druids, cut with a golden sickle. I saw some beautiful mistletoe as I drove here this morning in one of the local villages. So I'm not going to tell you where in case you go out there with your golden sickles and attempt to get some. But it's an interesting one, mistletoe, because it has not always been deemed a particularly lucky plant. And you may remember that I said at the beginning of the talk that Washington Irving came up with lots of nonsense, frankly, about Christmas. And he came up with the notion that mistletoe used to be banned from the church because it was a pagan plant and you couldn't let it in. But we have accounts of churches decorating their interiors with mistletoe that go right back to the medieval period. So again, you know, you have to be cautious of what you read. So let's move on to the next image and think about Christmas preparations, because if we're bringing our greenery in and bedecking our houses with holly and ivy and mistletoe, then one of the other things that most people start thinking about at this time of year, and you may already have done this, is start thinking about what you're going to eat over the holiday season. Winter and particularly festive Christmas foods obviously have a massive amount of tradition around them. It's one of the things that in putting this talk together today, I realised that almost every category that I've chosen we could have talked for hours about. But I think I wanted to include food particularly because it's something Helen and I have talked about, that in terms of gathering memories and traditions from people, getting first-hand accounts, that food is one of the things that sparks off people's memory probably more than anything. So I included here for you, just to maybe get memories stirring a little bit, 2 written accounts. One from Alison Utley, who was, you probably know Alison Utley. She wrote the Little Grey Rabbit books, which are lovely, but also was very much a countryside writer. She wrote some wonderful books about growing up in the countryside, and better still, she was a local girl to our part of the world. She grew up in Derbyshire, so excuse the strange noise that's occurring in the background there. I don't know what that is, but it's some sort of Christmas alarm going off. And Alison Utley, I think, had that sort of childhood, which she remembers in her book Country Things, which was published in 1946, which was, even by the early 20th century, which is when she's writing about dying out, where the farmer or the squire or whoever had the money in the area would maybe give you a brace of pheasants, or might kill an ox and give you a piece of meat for Christmas from that, that it was something that was very much reliant on the generosity of the landlord to supply his tenants with a Merry Christmas. What will be a slightly more recent memory in the other quote that I've put on the slide there about Stir Up Sunday, which some of you may have even done last Sunday, I don't know. This is from a book that was actually published by, my slides have just moved themselves through some strange means. But
I think.
We're getting a sneak preview here of all sorts of things.
Just take control and then go back.
Sorry, the machine is telling me to take control. I'm going forward rather than backwards, Aoife. What do I need to do?
There we go.
Okay, lovely. Sorry about that, folks. So yeah, the book that I found that quote in is it's a very interesting one to me, obviously, because I've spent the last 15 years or so researching things to do with Lincolnshire. But what's really annoying about it is it doesn't tell you who gave the memories or the dates on it. But the book was published in '95 and had been collected by members of the WI, and they were recollections from their family. And I think this particularly was interesting about the butcher delivering this lump of beef suet that then became the Christmas pudding, and presumably, went into other Christmas fare as well. And this is something very much, my mother used to make exactly this sort of Christmas pudding, I think. I certainly remember grating the carrots for it. And the idea of wrapping up your threepenny bits and placing them in the pudding, which comes from, again, a much older tradition, which we tend to associate with Twelfth Night, which is to do with putting a bean into your Twelfth Night cake, and whoever gets the bean gets to be the ruler of that particular evening celebration. So I guess that's where the Christmas pudding tradition comes from too. So after Stir Up Sunday and you've made your Christmas puddings, you might bring your log and your other greenery into the house on Christmas Eve. Again, a time that was associated with mummas and plays and guising and being entertained, which I will, I promise, come back to. But I also just wanted to mention the winter ghost story. So it's something I think we do associate with Christmas now, is the telling of tales. And this goes back a long way. We tell ghost stories at Christmas because we were out in groups in the evening, visiting houses, carol singing, going out around the village. And it was a holy time, and therefore we were safe to do this. We could go out in the dark without fear, because it was such a holy time of year, and we could tell stories about ghosts. Dickens, of course, really popularises this when he writes A Christmas Carol. But I quite like that little quote from Shakespeare. A sad tale is best for winter. I have one of sprites and goblins. And sprites and goblins do make an appearance every now and again. You might know, if you don't take your holly out by Twelfth Night, or indeed by Candlemas Day, every leaf that's left behind will turn into a sprite or a goblin. and menace you. The Yule log is something we tend not to do these days, and it was something that sort of made a bit of a brief appearance in this country. It seems to have appeared from Northern Europe at some point in the 1600s and become a tradition which has then died out again, because really we don't have the sort of fireplaces to burn a great log on for the whole of the Christmas holiday anymore. But the Yule log I thought I'd mention because it is one of those traditional things that has morphed into something else, and which we now perhaps best know because it's a chocolatey thing that we eat at Christmas rather than actual physical log that we bring into the house. But the Yule log was also one of those traditions that had kind of rituals that went with it. The Yule log should be lit with a piece from the old Yule log from the previous year. If you look across the country, there are any number of traditions about bits of the Yule log being used for things during the year to come. So again, it's one of those rituals which tends to make you think that it must go back into something maybe pre-Christian, and that now we associate it again with sort of Elizabethan Christmases and with Victorian Christmases, that big houses would have these great Yule logs burning for the duration of the holidays in their fireplaces. And of course, keeping your log, the piece that you were going to use for next year, safe is very important. You can see from Robert Herrick's poem there that you need to keep it safely, and then the fiend can do no mischief. Robert Herrick's very fond of fiends and goblins in his poem Hesperides, but it does provide us with an incredibly entertaining version of Christmases from the mid-1600s. It really is a great source. So, having made your Christmas puddings on Stir Up Sunday, you probably think about making mince pies, or maybe these days we all buy mince pies. In researching this, put out the question to a group of Lincolnshire folk about what they remembered eating at Christmas. And one of the grislier things that came up in this was the pluck mince pie. Now, I think we all know that probably that mince pies originated as a meat mince pie. I've popped an Elizabethan recipe on the slide for you there, so you can see the sort of thing they were making. I think by the 19th century, by and large, mince pies had become what we think of as mince pie today, in that the meat had been replaced by fruit. However, in Lincolnshire, it seems that even up to probably the 1960s and 70s, quite a lot of people were making pluck mince pies still. The pluck, just in case you don't know, is the more unsavoury part of the pig or other animal. So it would be the heart and the trachea and the gizzard and sort of grisly bits of the creature, put through the good old-fashioned Spong tabletop mincer, and then mixed with, as you can see, the sort of mix of fruit that you'd get in an Elizabethan mince pie and baked in pastry. I couldn't find anybody who could supply me with a recipe for that from their grandmothers, great grandmothers, or whatever. So if anybody's got that one, I'm not going to make them. No, I'm not, taking research that far. But I would like to see a traditional recipe for that. Everybody I know who has eaten one wishes to forget the experience. Alison Utley's memories of mince pies are much more, much nicer, proper mincemeat mince pies. Which brings me on to this rather thing. The little book of Mrs. Edith Day of Grantham. Edith Green, was born in 1894 in Grantham. And when she was about to be married in 1916. Arthur Day, who's there on the screen, you can see her there with him, came back from France for 3 days so they could get married. He was fighting in the First World War, and she was given a notebook by her mum in order to write down recipes so that when Arthur came home from the war, she could cook for him. And this little book ended up in the possession of Mrs. Day's grandson, Keith, who during the recent lockdown, the second lockdown, decided that every day he would photograph a page of Mrs. Day's book and put it on Facebook. So he's only been doing this for 3 weeks and has already become a star of local radio and all sorts of things because everybody is absolutely fascinated by this. And the little book now has, I think, over 700 followers on Facebook. I've put the name of the group there because I know people are going to want to get onto that. And he very kindly gave me permission to reproduce Mrs. Day's plum pudding, the one that she made at Christmas traditionally, on the slide here for you to have a look at. And I think you know, if you've ever made a Christmas pudding, you will probably recognise that as being, you know, very much the tradition involving candied peels and fruit and breadcrumbs, and the ubiquitous grated carrot, which, as I say, is always the thing I remember about my mum's Christmas puddings, which again, I think that recipe came from her great-grandmother who had been a cook in service. So these recipes start, you can see they start to originate, you know, quite a long way back. But I think there's nothing more evocative than food and people's memories of what they eat in certain places and at certain times, whether it's nice or nasty. You know, I mean, the mince pies certainly had an impact on people. And in asking about what people remembered eating, you know, in terms of regional food and local food and the things that I think now we're all trying to pick up on again a bit more, but have maybe lost touch with a little bit over recent years. Paul Sanderson contacted me and told me about how he remembered Christmas breakfast. Now, this will be, he's not giving too much away, but a teeny bit older than I am. So I think we're talking about growing up in the 1960s and 70s here. And you can see, he says, his Christmas breakfast is entirely different to what most people think of, I think, as breakfast. And that it's more like a Sunday tea, that it consists of, oh, it's a good old Lincolnshire stuff, pot pies and hazelnuts, chine. If you don't know about stuffed chine, it is the most marvellous kind of collar of bacon stuffed with parsley. If you're vegetarian, I apologise, it is not marvellous for you, but if you're carnivorous, chine is a wonderful thing. Tomatoes, cucumber, pickled beetroot. So yes, very much a kind of tea time meal. So this got a group of us talking, and it came, and it certainly wasn't something I'd known about before, but it transpired that this is quite a Lincolnshire tradition. Certainly the pork pie for Christmas breakfast seems to have been almost universal at one time. So if you want to, you know, kind of relive a bit of rural tradition there, you can have your pork pie at breakfast instead of tea time. A less excessive but perhaps more typical and, you know, slightly older style rural Christmas is described in Flora Thompson's Lark Rise to Candleford. I'm sure a lot of you will have read this, or you will have seen the TV series which was made from it. Lark Rise is a kind of semi-autobiographical account of excuse me, growing up in a village at the turn of the 20th century. And I think what Thompson says about it and about the food that's associated with it is, you know, very, very typical really of what a lot of country people in fact would experience and remember, that you know, your Christmas presents were basically an orange and a handful of nuts, and if you had a sister who was in service, You might get a Christmas box or a Christmas present because she'd be the one who'd be able to afford to buy it for you. The farmer was the one that you maybe relied on for the joint of beef. He would, you know, maybe supply that. And I thought what she said about the Christmas pudding was interesting here, that it's kind of a suet duff with fruit in it. Because if you can't get all those expensive ingredients, then you make something you're familiar with and add what luxury items you can to it. And I think these sorts of accounts of growing up at the turn of the century and just into the 20th century are very interesting. I think she must be almost writing here at a time contemporaneous with that of Mrs. Day's little book, because she talks about how all the men are in the army, and you know, again, it gives you a little glimpse into how things were for people in that particular place and at that particular time. So Christmas Day, really the 25th of December, has very few traditions other than those that are around Christmas presents and trees and food and what we've come to, you know, make of that kind of Christmas or midwinter festival. St. Stephen's Day, the 26th of December, Boxing Day if you like, is a time when we sort of return a little bit to those kinds of traditions that remind us of the past. More recently football matches, but things a little bit like the Shrovetide football matches that you get in particular places where football is played on the streets of a town. That you know, is something that goes back into an earlier tradition, and I'll show you something in a minute or two that maybe gives you a taste of that kind of thing. Mummas plays again and Morris dancing. Those pictures, I'm afraid, were not taken on Boxing Day that you've got there. They were actually taken on Midsummer Day, but I'm sure they wear the same things at Christmas. And that was a rather wonderful Mass Morris experience, which if you've never had a Mass Morris experience, I urge you all to get one, because it was wonderful. But the idea of Boxing Day and Christmas boxes or arms is one I think we sort of remember, although nobody really seems terribly sure about whether this was the day that tradesmen gave out Christmas boxes, whether it was the day that servants got their Christmas boxes, whether it was the day the apprentices went home with some money and gave that as a Christmas box. It's all rather vague, but the idea that this is to do with again, charity, alms as charity, a little bit like St. Thomas's Day, is very much part of the idea of the season. And I think this goes regardless of whether you're talking about Christmas or, you know, some other sort of midwinter festival, that this notion of giving to people who haven't got as much, that making winter more comfortable for people who have less is something relevant. A few New Year's Eve traditions there from the East Midlands. I don't know if anybody recognises any of these. I have to say they weren't ones I'd really come across before. If somebody arrives at your, or if a boy arrives at your door at midnight carrying firewood, give him some money. That's a little bit like the kind of Scottish first footing traditions that we're maybe more aware of, and the idea of putting coal or money outside, I think, is something that's almost universal across the country, and the idea of turning your money as well at midnight on New Year's Day. But I do like the idea that you should never pay a bill on New Year's Day, or your whole year will be dominated by bills. So that's one I think to remember for this year. Similarly, the ivy leaf, which seems to be a bit of a Lincolnshire thing, that you take ivy into the house with you early on New Year's Day, so that that brings you luck for the coming year. But a slightly more sinister New Year's tradition we've got here, which is this idea that footprints appearing in the ashes of the fire. I'd be terrified if footprints had suddenly appeared in my beautifully smoothed ashes of the fire from the night before, or footprints that weren't mine anyway. Pointing into the house is good because that house will have a birth, but pointing out, not so good, there'll be a death. Although I do wonder how many families didn't have a birth or a death at some point during a year. You know, that seems almost like a pretty safe bet, really. But the other, the little newspaper clipping I've included there, I think is quite interesting about take out, then take in. Bad luck will begin. Take in, then take out. Good luck comes about. So the idea that you mustn't take anything out of the house on New Year's morning until somebody's brought something into it is the crucial one there. And I do have vague memories of people that I grew up with, older people, people's grandparents, doing this in rural Lincolnshire. And certainly this idea about bringing a piece of wood into the house, because it would ensure that you'd got good luck and a fire for the year to come. So it's all about ensuring comfort and prosperity for the year ahead. And again, I'm sure you can trace these things, you know, further back. Quite how they've been adapted over the years through the process of losing a lot of these traditions with the Reformation is, you know, debatable. But Twelfth Night or Wassail Eve, we've got a bit of a poem again by Robert Herrick there. This is the tradition that on Twelfth Night you have a special cake. Now, if you were wealthy, if you lived in one of the great country houses in England at this time, you would have one heck of a cake for Wassail Eve. Incredibly elaborate cakes were baked, full of, you know, lovely fruit and things, but decorated with icing and marzipan, and you know, kind of elaborate sugar constructions on them. Really, you know, works of art as much as pieces of food. Most people, though, would have something like a fruit cake. And I do wonder if this really is where the notion of Christmas cake comes from, that it originates with this wassail cake, because in the cake you will hide your bean, and the person who finds the bean is then king of Wassail Night. And you can see from the engraving we've got there that, you know, Wassail Night, you could go wild. It was a real party night. So somebody gets to be almost like a lord and misrule on Wassail Night, so they can rule over all these shenanigans that are going on. Sometimes a pea and a bean goes into the cake, and then you have a king and a queen. And again, Robert Herrick, you know, a wonderful source of these traditions. One that's perhaps a bit less well known is the Wassail Box. Now, wassailing generally, I probably should have said, but got carried away with Robert Herrick earlier, that wassail, it basically means like good health to you. It's a wassail is a hail, well met kind of thing. And we maybe tend to associate it a bit more with the apple growing areas of the country these days, because there it is still carried on very much as a tradition, where perhaps pieces of toast are put in the boughs of the apple trees and they're shot at, and people pour a libation of cider onto the roots to ensure the apple harvest for the next year. That's quite appropriate being in Southwell today, I think, being the home of the Bramley apple. I'm sure there must be, I don't know if people wassail the Bramley apple here, they maybe do, I don't know. But wassail boxes are a very different thing, and they're almost like a version of a medieval reliquary box that people would make out of wood or an old shoebox and would then take from house to house. And they would have a doll in them, they would have some fruit, paper flowers, all sorts of little bits and pieces. Sometimes things like sweets and marzipan fruit were put in them. And whoever you showed the box to should give you some money, or they should give you some food or sweets or some sort of little token. So again, a lot of these traditions really are about giving and receiving. at Christmas. And this seems to be something that really only continued in Yorkshire, and particularly the Scarborough area, into the 20th century. But really fascinating tradition, I think. And there seem to be very few wassail or vessel boxes, as they're called, still in existence. Right, it's all right. Don't worry, Aoife. I slipped through 2 slides there, but I can go back to that one. Let's have a look at this one just very briefly, because I'm aware of how time's going and I want to get to mumming before we finish. This is maybe what we tend to think of as wassailing, and I'm sure you will all have come across these kinds of ideas about you know, the apple harvest and wassailing. But just in case you want to do things properly over the coming festive season, make yourself some lambswool. This is what you should be drinking on Twelfth Night. I made this a couple of years ago. I thought it was all right. I won't tell you what my husband said about it, but it's nice. It's a spiced, sweet beer, enhanced with sherry. And with a baked apple in it, basically. Delicious. But that's the traditional thing to drink on Twelfth Night. It's a kind of wassail drink. There are endless variations of it. But again, this idea that you use one of the apples from the previous harvest and you're drinking to ensure the success of the next harvest seems very appropriate with it. St Distaff's Day. Now, I don't know, there may be parts of the country, and I know we've got people from all over the place in the lobby, or whatever we call it, the room today. Again, I'd like to know if there are still things that go on for St Distaff's Day, because I had trouble really finding any very specific more recent sort of ideas about this. St Distaff, I should say, is not a real saint. A distaff is a thing that you have on a spinning wheel. But St Distaff's Day was known as that because it was the day when everybody went back to work. We're basically talking about January the 6th here. Everybody goes back to work on the land. But for the men, it's still seen very much as a holiday, but the women are back spinning, cooking, doing all the things that they usually do, and the men play practical jokes on them. And happily, the women are then allowed to chuck a bucket of water over them for their troubles in disrupting their work. So again, it links with all these traditions about Saturnalia and misrule, and there being a kind of subversive edge to a lot of these customs. So basically everybody's playing tricks on each other and dousing each other in water on St Distaff's Day. But it's seen as a kind of end of Christmas tradition. As I say, whether things still go on in the East Midlands today around that, I would be very interested to know, because I couldn't come up with any of them. Right, I promised you mummas and geysers towards the end of the talk, and this, I don't like slides that have really too much writing on them, but I couldn't decide what to leave out of this account of a set of mummas arriving at Newstead Abbey in 1834. Some of you will know, that I'm sneaking a mention of Newstead in here because it's where I'm based part of the time. And the servants' hall that is described in this piece of writing is somewhere I know very well. So this is Washington Irving, and again, how much we can trust him is very debatable, but this purports to be a factual account of a plough play that was performed at Newstead Abbey in 1834, where a team of ploughmen turn up. This is what you had to do if you were a ploughboy on Plough Monday. Plough Monday is the first Monday after January the 6th. So whatever Monday comes after the 6th of January, sometimes it is the 6th of January, that's Plough Monday. And the ploughboys used to go round and they would have a plough which they decorated, and they would basically come and menace you for money with their plough, and if you didn't give them any, they'd dig up your threshold with their plough. So it's quite a dark tradition in many ways, but around this has developed a whole load of customs that are to do with plays, and they're very like the kinds of traditional folk plays that you get performed on St George's Day and at Halloween and at other times of the church and ritual year in the United Kingdom. And Washington Irving was lucky enough to witness this when he was staying at the Abbey with its then owner Thomas Wildman in 1834. And you can see he says that they're dressed up in rough garb. One has his head muffled in bearskin and a bell dangling behind him. He's the clown or the fool of the party. The fool is always there with these plays. There's always somebody literally playing the fool. The rest are decorated with ribbons and armed with wooden swords. You might start to get an image of Morris dancers in your mind now. And this is exactly where this is going, because the play culminates in a Morris dance. And they perform a play involving St George and the Dragon. That's not altogether the most typical of Plough Monday plays, but this one seems to have had a bit of a local twist added to it, because we've got Robin Hood and Maid Marian coming in, Beelzebub with his wife Bessie. If you didn't know, that's what his wife was called. She crops up a lot in mystery plays, Bessie. And as he says, these rude pageants are the lingering remains of the old customs of Plough Monday. So even in 1834, people are looking back to this kind of notion of old Christmas. I think we've constantly existed in a state of looking back to a Christmas that was somehow more traditional than the one we have now. So even in 1834, they are doing that. The Plow Plays have a real tradition. Anywhere that's to do with farming has a tradition of Plow Plays, really. And this is the Calverton Plow Play. You can see Beelzebub has made his appearance there. The usual characters that we have are a doctor, a farmer, or a recruiting sergeant. There's usually a dame called Bessie or Jane. There might be a lady, bright and gay. But these characters come in and perform some sort of drama whereby at the end of it, St George will overcome, whether it's a dragon or, you know, whatever other evil Beelzebub might inflict on people. So you've got a little bit from Calverton there. You see that Beelzebub, when he comes in, it's always tradition, you say, "In comes I, old Beelzebub. Under my hand I carry a club, under my arm a white leather dripping pan. Don't you think me a funny old man? Is there any old woman in this company who dare stand before me?" And you can see there is indeed a funny old woman standing in front of him who, she's got considerably more hair than that now by the looks of it. But such good fun if you haven't been to one. I do believe that, and I do know, by the way, people who are local to Southwell, that you have your own Mummas play, and I believe they performed it last week and were filmed doing it in the yard of the Final Whistle, which is a jolly good place to do it, in my opinion. And I think that is going to be available online. And whereas normally when, you know, your characters come in and romp around the pub and provide all this entertainment, they would then have a hat that you put some money in. I think this year that's being done online, and I guess a lot of these Plow Plays are going to have to do that this year, which is in many ways yeah, I mean, it's good that it's still going on, but a shame they can't actually get out into the local pubs. And you might be thinking, well, that's not really very much of a lost tradition, but it was. The Plow Plays really, towards the 19th century, had almost died out, and 2 world wars in the 20th century did no favours for them at all. if you look at the newspapers from the 1940s, they're saying things like a plough play has been revived in Mansfield. You know, that they are coming back. So again, we've got a revival of a revival in these plays. But two that, again, are sort of local to this part of the world, to the East Midlands. We've got the poor old horse, who is a poor old horse who really his owner is saying he's useless, he's past it, he's, you know, no good at all, and he, poor old thing, he gets whipped and all sorts, has a terrible time. But those are the Handsworth sword dancers, who are actually based in West Yorkshire, performing for, I think that was for one of the Heritage Open days. But this one I love, the Harthill Tuppers, the Derby Tup. Where the butcher, basically the play is about killing the sheep and the cuts of, you know, the cuts of meat sort of emanating from it. Plus you get a fool and Lady Bessie and the doctor. And at some point the dame will almost always get hit by the devil or some other ne'er-do-well and then be brought to life by the doctor. There's a core to these plays. Every area, the presentation of the play is different, the words are different, but at the core, there is a message that is to do with revival, with things coming back to life. So this notion of the doctor being able to bring back, you know, the dame, etc., is very much what we associate with them, and why I think they have persisted. They fit in with the traditions of the season. And I'm aware with some of the comments coming through there, I know this is really whizzing through them at high speed. You know, it'd be nice to come back and perhaps do a serious talk on mumming at some point, because it is a really fascinating tradition. But we talked a little bit at the beginning of the talk about Old Christmas Day. This was a tradition that I first came across, I think, in this poem. I don't know if anybody else knows. I'm sure you will. If you did Thomas Hardy at school like I did, I'm sure that poem, The Oxen, might be one that you've come across. And it deals with the tradition that at Christmas Eve at 12 o'clock the animals kneel and sort of pay homage, because they recognise it's the hour of Christ's birth. And of course people, when the calendar was changed in 1752, people got really worried about the fact that Christmas Day wasn't on proper Christmas Day anymore. So a lot of these traditions have held over to Old Christmas Day, which would have been January the 6th, which again, you know, it links it to Plough Monday, which is the following Monday. And I thought this idea, again, of the Yorkshire custom of watching the beehives over New Year was a lovely one. You're supposed to as well listen for the rustle of leaves, because thorn trees were supposed to blossom at midnight on Old Christmas night. And that's the tradition of the Glastonbury thorn, of course, which you probably, some of you will know about. And we've got a little engraving of the Glastonbury thorn there too. Yeah, I thought I'd just mention, because just looking at some of the comments there, I'm gathering that people would probably like a bit more detail on mummers and mumming, and I'd be more than happy to do that at some point. But you probably know that associated with this, those of you that are interested in this subject, you probably know about Haxey Hood maybe, which is by no means a lost tradition. This is a tradition that is absolutely up and running, and even as we speak is a kind of current issue, because the Haxey Hood is basically like a mummers play that's performed as a game of, I was going to say football, but it's not that. There are these men called boggans and a fool, and they all dress up and a piece of fabric is thrown up in the air after various strange rituals like smoking the fool, where it appears that he's almost set fire to. This sack or whatever is thrown, and 13 men from each team go hell for leather after this thing, and basically it's a, I don't know what the closest thing is, it's like a mad game of rugby in between the two village pubs. Unfortunately, one of those pubs has just been sold and they're trying to make flats out of it. And this is a real problem for the Haxey Hood game, because it only ever operates between those two pubs, and this, it would be the end of a very old tradition, which even from the mid-19th century, if you have a look at that little bit of text I've included there, it was deemed a very rough and disturbing event. It's almost legitimised violence. It used to get very, very rough indeed. I think in recent times it's maybe a little calmer, not that much though. But there are other traditions like this, which again, you may know of some from your part of the world, and that's part of what we're trying to do here, to gather these things in, and in a minute or two, with a bit of luck, we'll have a chance to maybe hear about some of those from you. Just to finish, really, St Agnes Eve on January the 20th seemed like a good place to things. I don't know what the name of that piece of poetry there, it's by, again, a lot of you will be familiar with that poem, but it tells how there is a tradition on St Agnes Eve women might see the vision of their future love or husband appear to them if they go through various rituals. Keats, I have to say, sexes it up a bit, because he has his Virgin Madeline lying naked on her bed. That wasn't ever part of it. The idea was that you would, again, do something like often walking upstairs and getting into bed backwards in silence. But the really interesting one, I think, around this, that does seem to persist in some cases, is the dumb cake, where a group of friends, usually female, but not always, between 4 and 2, depending on which part of the country you come from, get together and make this dumb cake, which is a bit more, if you look at the recipe there, more like a kind of oat cake kind of thing. And you make this in silence, and you break it into however many pieces for each, one for each person, and then you take it up to bed with you in silence, probably going backwards as you do so, just to make sure, and you place it under your pillow, and then of course you dream of your future husband or lover. It's always putting things under the pillow leads to it seeps up into the brain to give you the dreams. So that's a dumb cake, and if anybody has ever made one, I'd love to know what happened. So by February the 2nd, if you haven't taken your Christmas decorations down, what are you playing at? But also, it's Candlemas Day. If you get to the new year and you realise that on 12th night you haven't taken your Christmas decorations down, you don't take them down then, you wait till Candlemas, and that's when you take them down. That's when, if you don't, your holly will turn into goblins. We know that because Robert Herrick again tells us this here. Down with the rosemary, and so down with the bays and mistletoe, down with the holly, ivy, all, wherewith ye deck the Christmas hall. So that's so the superstitious find, not one least branch there left behind, for look, how many leaves there be neglected there. Mates, just to me, so many goblins you will see. So yeah, that's the end really of a traditional country Christmas, is to get your greenery down on Candlemas Day. There are all sorts of weather predictions, again, depending on what part of the world you come from around Candlemas. and I am going to leave that there so that we can get some feedback from you, because I can see lots of messages appearing there. Somebody says, what if we want to see goblins? And I have to say that has always been my response to that as well. I think you just leave your hobby up, see what happens. I would just like to say, if I mean, obviously talk to us now, but if anybody's got anything, traditions that they want to share with us, that's the email address to get in contact with us on, and that would be absolutely wonderful if you've got things. This is meant to be a starting point so that we can build on this with first-hand experience. So I know that's been an absolute whiz through, but thank you very much for your time and attention. I think I'm handing over to Helen for a minute.
Thank you.
Oh, there she is.
Thank you so much for that. That was truly fascinating. And if we were obviously meeting in a hall, we would be giving you a round of applause now, but I don't know, I'm going to give you a round of applause anyway. So it's fantastic. What we'll do now is we will take questions, but it would be much easier, because we can only see so many people on the screen. It'd be much easier if people could actually type in the chat if they have a particular question. So I don't know if anybody wants to do that. I know we had one earlier on about when Christmas Day. Let me just see. It was quite a way back. When was
somebody
Christmas
asked
Day
when
set?
Christmas Day was established. I think it was. I mean, we're going back a long way into the early days of the Christian Church, but it wasn't established in the earliest period. I'm not going to drag a date out of my memory because I know I will get it wrong. But what I'm thinking is the 6th century after Christ, AD, I think. And I think it was the Council of Nicosia that may have established that, because I think that's when most of the church festivals were put in place. So to begin with, and I mean, I think for a long time, really, Christmas was very much, you know, Christ Mass in terms of the Christian church. Christmas Eve was seen as a day when you fasted and you know, it was almost like a penitential day, and then Christmas Day, you know, rather like Easter. And of course, Easter was the big celebration. It's less so now in this country, but for a lot of places, really Easter or Epiphany are the big celebrations. And I realise I didn't mention the word Epiphany, and I should have done when we were talking about January the 6th and the Plough Monday stuff, because we're talking about the Feast of the Three Kings there. And I know, you know, in a lot of parts of Europe, that is a much bigger celebration than Christmas Day and Christmas Eve itself is.
Oh, I think we've got some questions coming in now, so I'm trying to look at them. But my screen's been blocked by all the messages popping up. Yeah, Paul's asking, where did the name Yule come from?
The name Yule is again a Northern European word for the festival for that time of year. It's the old midwinter festival. It's the Solstice festival that would be celebrated with light and fire. And you think again worldwide, this is the time when we have festivals of light. You know, we've just had Diwali, Hanukkah, we have Christmas, there is Yule, which is, you know, for a large community of people who are not Christian in this country and follow the pagan faith, you know, that's the festival. So we've I think with Christmas in this country, we've very, very successfully taken a whole load of traditions. And I think we keep doing this because I notice more and more of those old Northern European traditions creeping in. I've noticed, for instance, we have Krampus creeping into our Christmas celebrations these days, who's the kind of nasty helper of St. Nicholas or Father Christmas, who deals with the naughty children. So, you know, I think Northern Europe's always had a slightly darker version of this, maybe, than we have. Maybe we did spend too much time reading Dickens and Washington Irving and have got Midwinter Festival.
Okay. Francis, I don't know whether you're still ideas about the Mummas Plays. I don't know if you want to say something about that, because you had quite a few comments earlier on during the talk. If you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm a Morris dancer as well, hence some of these things.
Brilliant.
Blackboard and Morris dancer.
Oh,
and I know Leicester well for the Strawberry Festival. Sorry, not Leicester.
Yes.
Lincolnshire. The Strawberry Festival in the new year, which happens around Wassail and whatever. And I also have taken part in the local Mummas plays that we have. But this year we can't get a play together because the topics change from day in to day out, so we just cannot get a local topic going. We like local topics in the plays. The characters
this year of all years, you could have a kind of very relevant Mummas play, couldn't you?
Yeah,
with the doctor coming in.
The next day it's irrelevant. One day you've got a topic and next day it's gone. It changes so often. So we're finding it difficult to put together. We're going to do a Zoom Mummers when we sort out.
Wonderful. Oh, do let me have details of that, because yes, that would be great. And I think a lot of groups are trying to do this, aren't they? I was talking to someone from the Folklore Centre at Sheffield last night who was saying exactly this, because the Whittlesea Strawberry Festival has gone online this year too. So which good from the point of view that we can all but maybe participate a bit this year, but bad from the point of view that the Strawberry doesn't actually get to walk the streets.
He won't get burned either. The other thing too is that I have done several times at the Gist to Southwell Festival in Southwell with our Morris dancing. So
Wonderful.
yeah. And I know the Bramley Apple and the pub you mentioned as well quite well. The can't remember what we called it. The
Final Whistle.
Yes.
It's a jolly nice pub. Well,
I'm all very well.
Francis, if you could leave us an email, maybe it would be nice to get in touch with you and just have a proper chat about this at some point.
Okay, will do. All right, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Francis. I think Sophie, you've touched on so many subjects, and you could have gone into a lot more detail. So I think I'm sure everyone's enjoyed this afternoon. So maybe we could look at having you back at some point to sort of talk maybe about some of our spring festivals. Because I'm sure there's lots more to talk about.
Oh, loads.
Is there any other questions coming in? Has anyone got anything they'd like to share about country traditions that they remember at all?
I see pork pies have stirred people up. There's a lot of messages about pork pies coming up. Still traditional in Leicestershire, and of course, yes. I would imagine in Melton Mowbray, if you don't have a pork pie for your Christmas breakfast, you're probably failing in some way.
Oh, Rolf, is that Rolf has said about going is it guising?
Yes, guising. Yeah, it's interesting.
No, I was just going to say
traditions are called as well, I think, isn't it? Whether it's guising or mumming or all these different names for what is very much the same thing, and also things like first footing and traditions like Mischief Night come under the title of guising as well.
Yes, because it was when we were living in Scotland, it was guising instead of sort of penny for the guy, but it was actually Halloween. So they didn't actually have penny for the guy, but they would have to go and sing or say a poem at people's doors, and in return, then they would get given sweets or whatever. But they had to do something in order to get it. There was no trick. So just wonder whether that tradition had gone over to the States, combined with something else, then come back as trick or treating.
I think that's exactly what happened. And I think when people say that things like trick or treat are an American tradition, that we've picked up on, I think actually it's an old English tradition that we've inherited back from our cousins over the pond, because where they got that from in the first place certainly wasn't from any of the Native American traditions. It was from the European settlers who went over there. I mean, people, I often hear this thing about turkey. Oh, well, you know, that's because the Americans have it at Thanksgiving. And actually, we were eating turkey in the Middle Ages in this country, but only if we were very wealthy. And I think that carried on for many years too, because in talking to people about what they had for their Christmas lunch, which frankly you could fill a day's worth of conference with, the amount of feedback I got to that question. But the consensus was generally beef if you were given it, or a capon. Never a turkey. And actually, I you know, again, I remember that from childhood. It was always capon on Christmas Day. Something you don't hear of now, isn't it?
Has anyone else got anything to add about different recipes from childhood that might be a little bit different?
Anybody made a plucked mince pie?
No.
I don't blame you.
No. Anything else anybody wants to add? I think it's worth saying that this reminiscence project I spoke about earlier, this rural memories or memories of nature, you know, if what you've heard this afternoon has made you think, oh yeah, actually there is something I'd really like to share, then you've got that contact address, education@southwellminster.org.uk, so you can certainly you can get in touch with us. If you look on our website, we'll send out the link. There is a form that you can download, which has got sort of lots of different prompts on for different memories connected to recipes and, you know, sort of memories of childhood and nature, and sort of contributing ideas for songs or poems that are connected to nature, which we can use as we go forward in the project. And next year, hopefully, when, you know, things are improved, we might be able to have an event where we feature some of these memories and the songs, and have something where we can all come together and sort of celebrate these memories and how important they are. So, I've got something about a butcher's on the top of steep hill that sold chine.
Oh yes, yeah. Oh, there's still one in my hometown that sells chine too. Lincolnshire, Lincolnshire wonder.
Right, well, we're coming to gradually to the end of this afternoon's session. As I said earlier, we are going to do other talks, so we'll obviously let you know about that. What I did want to do right at the end is obviously thank Sophie again for your fantastic talk this afternoon. So thank you. Another round of applause. And I also just want to thank the National Lottery Heritage Fund for supporting Sophie's talk this afternoon, and for supporting our Leaves of Southwell project, which is looking at obviously preserving the wonderful leaf carvings in the chapter house. And so all these talks and events that we're doing that are connected with the beauty of nature are all sort of rolling off those carvings, you know, and sort of inspiring us to really have a think about the importance of nature. So thank you once again to Sophie, and thank everyone for coming this afternoon and joining us on Zoom. Sorry if there were a few problems with the technology to start with, but we managed to do it. And please look out for that evaluation, and if you could fill it in, I'd be really grateful, because it would really help us plan events in the future that are, you know, sort of, well, as perfect as they can be under the circumstances of technology. So thank you once again for joining us, and we'll see you all soon.